Hey, let's talk about stable coins for a minute. Stable coins are a kind of cryptocurrency that is supposed to stay at a fixed value, usually $1, by being backed with reserves like cash or government bonds. And they're sold as safe and convenient, but there are serious questions about who controls them, what's really backing them, and how they could be used to centralize financial power. My guest today is Mark Goodwin, former editor in chief of Bitcoin Magazine, author of The Bitcoin Dollar, an economic monomyth. He now writes for Unlimited Hangout, where he investigates the rise of stablecoins and the power networks behind them. Mark, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Kim. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Long time listener, first time caller. So
Oh, yeah.
thanks for having me.
Well,
hmm
thank you. Okay, so this is important for people right now because, as you were just mentioning to me, the Genius Act. So there's a new act. We've seen Donald Trump. He's being surrounded by kind of I don't know, what do they call it? What's the nickname for the guys that they're calling them, like crypto bros
Crypto
or
bros
the crypto
is the
bros?
slang term. Yes, the kids are calling
Okay,
them these days.
and that would be like, who is, I think the leader of the crypto bros is David Sachs. Is that right?
Yes. So he, obviously PayPal Mafia guy, one of the first employees there. He's was designated in this new position created by the Trump administration. He's the AI crypto czar. So he's sort of the guy that gets to stand next to Trump when he signs these EOs and things. So yeah, he's
Okay.
certainly up there. One of the leaders of the crypto bros, you could say. Sure.
Okay. So explain to us what recently happened when it comes to the Genius Act and what that means. And then we'll get into what a stablecoin actually is and then what the issue is with them.
Sure. Yeah. So the Genius Act is really just the culmination of months, if not years, of legislation building towards this actual law getting signed by the president a couple weeks ago. And really, all it does, I say all as if it doesn't do so much, but it really just sets the guide rails for this whole industry. So stablecoin issuance is just exploding. I mean, it's a multi $200 billion industry with the head of the Treasury, the Secretary Bessent, basically saying when the Genius Act passes, $3.7 trillion of stablecoins will be unlocked because of this regulation. At least this demand is coming. So we're about to see the industry go even further. So the Genius Act really just kind of puts the guardrails on for who can issue these stablecoins, what they have to be backed by, and then what rules and regulations they have to adhere to as it relates to the Bank Secrecy Act and uh, you know uh, terrorism financing and money laundering and all these things that are generally picked up by the left talking about crypto, which I actually tend to agree with them sometimes about a lot of this illicit finance. I don't often find myself agreeing with an Elizabeth Warren about this stuff, but I think in this case she's correct. There are
Hmm.
absolute things we need to figure out as we make digital finance, and then of course the conflicts of interest of Trump himself issuing a stable coin and all of his crypto bro friends being the guys that are ready to take over this soon to be multi-trillion-dollar industry. So that's really what the Genius Act is in a nutshell. But obviously to really get into the nuts and bolts of it, we sort of have to get at to what a stable coin
Yeah.
is, right?
Okay. So, yeah, let's talk about what is a stable coin. Why do we even need a stable coin? Why do we even need crypto? Like, why can't we just continue on the way we've been? Which a lot of people feel that way. Most people don't have crypto. Most people have not gotten into this world. So I guess, yeah, what is a stable coin? How is it different than crypto?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think that's a great question, though. Why do we need this? Why do we need any of this? I think that's really the big question. And I think it's also the big question that the Genius Act and stablecoins answer. So, why do we need this? What is the whole point? Why is the government embracing this technology that has been sold to us as this sort of crypto anarchist, anti state movement? Why is the president now coming out and championing Bitcoin and stablecoins specifically? Well, there's a really big problem that we have issuing new debt and financing and servicing the debt we've already issued. So right now we're up to $36 trillion of debt. That is because of the way we produce our debt, we have to pay interest on the debt we create. So we basically sell the debt to um, normally other nations, but now there's these stablecoin issuers that are stepping up to be the new source of demand for buying government debt in the form of treasuries. So I don't want to get crazy into the economics of it, but basically, we need this. I say we very liberally, but the US government needs a new source of demand to sell their debt to, as we're, basically having this runaway debt problem. So stablecoin issuers come out and they solve a couple problems. The main one they solve is they bring more users onto the dollar system. That's really easy to get access to dollars when all you need is a smartphone or an email address or a computer. And all of a sudden, you can download a wallet program and you have access to basically a US dollar bank account on your phone. The world has obviously been dollarized for a long time, but there's been sort of, in the physical world of dollars, there's physical limitations. You want to get $1 billion of dollars, 30 years ago, you got to get pallets of cash shipped out to
Right.
Argentina or wherever. And there's physical limitations. Obviously, if you want to use gold, there's even more. You need boats and trucks to move around all this value. Now we
Yeah.
have crypto. We can move billions of dollars, by basically sending a text message. So there's a huge,
You can also seem to, like, be able to disappear $1 billion with just a hack.
absolutely, totally. Yeah, that's another part of this as we get into what is a stable coin, the idea is that it's stable because it's a one-to-one peg. So there's a dollar token on the blockchain that represents a dollar in the bank account. But that doesn't mean that the bank account or the bank, can't go under. That doesn't mean that the issuer that from a technological standpoint can't have a hack or some issue. So this sort of idea of the stable coin as the name is a clever little trick to sort of imply confidence. It's a confidence game, but there's nothing to say that, the representation of the one-to-one peg is going to remain stable. And
Mhm.
also, I mean, we all know damn well the dollar isn't exactly the most stable currency in the world either, and it has rapid
Right.
fluctuations and has been debasing immensely, in this highly inflationary period. So what is it really stable against? I mean, these are basically IOUs that have been tokenized and digitized on these public blockchains. So that's what a stable coin is. The vast majority of the time you hear the word stable coin, it's going to be referencing dollar stable coins. 99% of all stable coins issued are US dollar stable coins, but they don't have to necessarily be dollars. There are gold backed stable coins that are relative to, a percentage of an ounce of gold. You could have a stable coin based on oil. You could have a stable coin based on the euro or the yuan
Okay.
or whatever.
But
But
it's basically a one-to-one ratio of some kind, basically, and
exactly.
it stays and it goes up and down based on the value of whatever it's attached to.
Exactly. So
Okay.
in the state of the dollar stable coins, which is mostly what we'll be talking about today, the reason why it's interesting for people that are in the speculative side of crypto, like Bitcoin. Bitcoin is very much so known for these whipsaws of volatility and these like big speculative booms and busts.
Right.
If you are keeping the majority of your wealth in something like that, there may be a 50% crash in a day and you need to go buy groceries and all of a sudden your groceries are twice as expensive.
Yeah.
Whereas, the users of stable coins, again, it's really sold as this altruistic good. Hey, we can give people dollar access all around the world as their currencies are inflating away due to,
Mm.
central bank failures. We can give them stable coins. They don't have to play with Bitcoin. They don't have to do the speculative bubble. It's really
Uh-huh.
sold as this banking the unbanked, as so many of these technologies are really sold as this altruistic good. But in reality, when you begin to kind of peel back the layers of what a stable coin is, in reality, it's actually arguably much worse than a CBDC. And we've been
Okay.
sold the fear of a CBDC for a long time. It's kind of interesting that that was something that was really picked up, especially during COVID when there was a lot of fear of, okay, I'm a dissonant, I'm speaking out, I'm doing
Yeah.
what you did on, bringing up good points on shows of, hey, maybe we should, and they really did. They debanked people, and there was a
Right.
lot of issues with based on your, your right to free speech, that there was like financial hardships that came downstream of that. So people naturally did worry about the government having control of your money directly, and CBDCs were talked about by everybody.
Mhm.
Trump even, at his first week in office, he signed an executive order saying that they were going to ban the development of CBDCs, and it was viewed as
Yeah.
this huge win, right? Everybody wants that, we want the government to ban CBDCs. That's a good thing. But then 3 paragraphs later in that EO, he's saying, "But we're going to use stable coins and we're going to push that to entrench dollar hegemony over the whole world. And we're going to use stable coins to do that." So, why are we afraid of CBDCs, right? We're afraid of them being surveillable, seizable, and programmable. Those are kind of like the three main pillars of why we don't like CBDCs. Well, stable coins are absolutely as programmable as CBDCs. You're fearful of sort of climate change based restrictions on what you can spend your money on. Oh, I have all of this money. I want to go buy a steak, but I flew on a plane yesterday and my carbon credit social credit score is saying that I can't buy a steak or fill my tank of gas, programmably, because I did, such and such a thing. And the person that is the central force that is able to program my money is now restricting my ability to spend.
Mm,
Cash is pretty cool, honestly. It's not
right.
very cypherpunk and sexy, but it's fun. It's pretty hard to trace. There's a lot of advantages to it. Digital money has some advantages, as we talked about earlier. You can transfer billions of dollars with the click of a button, but also you're putting a ledger into basically an Excel sheet somewhere in the
Yeah.
world that is tracking that payment that you used. So that gets into the second point of the surveillability, and that's really where I think you know the dialectic of CBDC bad, stablecoin good, because it's a private
Mhm.
sector thing rather than government, is actually very dangerous. Because in many ways, because the way stablecoins are done, they're actually more surveillable by everybody in the world than just the government that you would be giving your information to in a CBDC. And it's a little bit backwards because it seems like I'm arguing that CBDCs are better or are good, and I'm certainly not. I don't want that at all.
It
But
sounds like they're the same.
exactly. But this is where they're actually slightly different, and I would argue stable coins are worse. So, everybody's used Venmo, right? When you use
Yeah,
Venmo, for some reason, they decided to attach a social media network to payments. It's very strange, but you can see on Venmo, oh, hey, my friend, paid so and so for a burrito yesterday, and I can
right.
see that transaction. I don't know why I should never be able to see this, but for some reason they made a social network
Yeah,
connected to
right.
money. And it's like the number one financial app that everybody uses to send their money in the States.
Well, I hide that part of it. I'm like, "Why?" Because it's weird. It is weird. I don't wanna see that, yes, I gave somebody money because because they gave my dog a bath or whatever it
Right.
is, right? Yeah,
Exactly.
weird.
And but so you chose, right? You selected something that said keep this information private,
Yeah, I had
Yes.
to,
Right,
right.
because it's
But
weird.
Venmo's tracking it because they
Of
require
course.
you to say what the money was for. Like, whenever
Of
you make a
course.
transaction, they force you in the comment, you have to say, "What was it for?" I usually just put some sort of an emoji,
Sure.
but yeah,
But
you
even
have to
sometimes
just
emojis get flagged for things, if it's like a Palestinian flag or something, like literally
right.
there's been instances of money being held up because of issues of where there's been financial embargoes. If you're sort of hinting that these funds are circumnavigating those things, there's actually been issues with that. But
Yeah.
but but to the point of, you have to choose, okay, I don't want this to be publicly posted on Venmo.
Mhm.
I want this to just be a private transaction between me and that person. But I know damn well that Venmo, of course, as a private company, is going to use that data and have that data. But it's a small box. It's me, the person I sent the money to, my bank, their bank, and
Yeah.
Venmo. That, there's like 6 parties involved that can have, all that information
That
of that
know that this
transaction.
transaction happened,
Of
sure, okay.
course. And that's
Yeah,
just there has to be trust. We can't replace trust entirely with technology. It's impossible. So there has to be some trust in banking and some trust in financial transactions. But when you use a blockchain, which is, a very confusing thing, it's very difficult for people to understand. And a lot of that is much like finances and Wall Street in general. They don't really want people to understand what the hell
right.
is going on. It's kind of by
Yeah,
design. You're in the washer. You're in this spin cycle. But a blockchain, really, all it is like that Venmo, feed of where all the transactions are. A blockchain is just a public ledger where every transaction is recorded publicly in a distributed database. So rather than it being just these 6 people that you're knowingly releasing your information to, which is the same as what a CBDC would be. If I made a transaction to you with a CBDC, me, the government, you, your bank, and my bank would all know, what that transaction was. But no one else without a warrant would be able to see that transaction. A
Yeah.
blockchain changes that entire game because it's published publicly on a
Mm.
public blockchain that anybody can download and look at the entirety of the ledger and all the transactions in it. So when it comes to warrantless surveillance, a public blockchain, a stable coin on a public blockchain issued by a private company is worse than a CBDC generally, because anybody that has the ability to download the blockchain and analyze the transactions can see your entire transactional history. So
Without a warrant.
without a warrant, that's
Yeah.
not good, you know?
Right.
And so it kind of leads us into this next point of warrantless surveillance. Well, you could say, well, hey, these stablecoin issuers, maybe they're run by a cool person. Maybe that's some, base guy who's like, yeah, I don't want, all the info. I'm going to set up this stuff and, we're not going to give your information away and we're going to do a private blockchain and yada, yada. But the reality is now we're in a new paradigm where the Genius Act is saying if you want to issue dollar stablecoins and play in our sandbox, you have to play by our rules. And if you want to buy a bunch of debt from the US government to back your stablecoins, much like in a bank, right? This is how the 2-tier banking system has always worked. Your bank buys bonds from the government and then creates the dollars in your checkings account. The US government very rarely actually creates dollars. They create reserves, sell them to private companies, banks, JP Morgan, et cetera, and they actually create the dollars in your
Mhm.
account. Same with stablecoins. They buy the debt and then they issue the tokens and you use the tokens. Well, if you want to play in the new stablecoin industry and you want to be able to buy X billions or trillions of dollars of debt from the government to issue your own, stablecoin, you have to you're at the whim of the government, the pressures of the government to adhere to their rules, because if you want to hold X billion dollars of treasuries, you can't just say screw you to the government. They will seize your treasuries and all of the money and the backing that they have in their accounts. So this is something we've actually seen. This isn't just theoretical. The biggest stablecoin issuer in the world is Tether, and they hold over $150 billion worth of treasuries. And they have since, they're a private company, not even domiciled in the United States, but they have onboarded the FBI, the Secret Service, Chain Analysis, which is a private company funded by the CIA to analyze blockchains. They've onboarded all of them onto their servers so that they can track the transactions and see who is using it and spending it, because they have to adhere to the public sector if they want to be able to keep all of their treasuries that they hold. So yes, it's a private company, but they're absolutely beholden to the public sector. But because they're a private company, there's not this constitutional protection of your right to spend and your right to bank and your right to free speech. No shoes, no shirt, no service. They can just shut down your account at the whim of a public sector, pressing. And we've seen this. We've seen billions of dollars seized and blacklisted by these stablecoin issuers due to public sector pressures.
Mhm.
So in a way, we've kind of learned through the years of looking at how the government and intelligence and the banking community works as they're digitizing the financial system. They like to use like their social networks.
Mhm.
They like to use these private sector cutouts, and then they pressure the private sector, like the social networks. They pressure them and say, debank this guy, shut down his YouTube account, close his Patreon. It's pressure coming from the public sector, but to these private sector companies, and they're sort of forced to do it because they want to play in the regulatory regime.
Right.
So now we're seeing that, okay, yeah, it sucked to get taken off Facebook, but at least your bank account was okay. Now we're
Right.
seeing that's going to be applied to if you say something wrong, your bank account and your stable coins can be taken and seized from your wallet because you said you criticized Israel or you
Right.
criticized, or whatever have you. So we're seeing this technology coming in that's super embraced by this administration at the same time as they're pushing Palantir and these other databases and social credit, systems technology wise. The fact that it's all happening at the same time should be very concerning, I think, for citizens, because we don't want there to be that much control and that centralization and pressure on our finances. And it's
Yeah.
ironic that they've really done this with something that was supposed to be very decentralized and supposed to be defanging the state. And now the state is using technology and crypto to find a buyer of their debt and to basically create a private sector cutout in lieu of a CBDC that in many ways is more beneficial for the state.
Thank you for watching this clip from the full Kim Iverson Show, which you can catch Monday through Friday, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern at KimIversonShow.com. It is free for you to watch. Again, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern, KimIversonShow.com. See you there.